So welcome everyone for the third session today, which will focus on promoting equity and inclusion in a digitalizing world. And we explicitly used digitalising, making the emphasis that something which is going on. I mean, there are lot of technological development has been going on for many decades now, and it's likely to continue in the future. So I also hope our great panelists will provide some crystal ball insights on what to expect. And our focus will be on equity and equality and inequality. And in fact, we can already build on a couple of observations in the previous two sessions. I mean, some of the speakers expressed in the morning, for example, that AI is helping the labor market for a better matching. In the afternoon, Martin Kahanetz, for example, mentioned that there were a number of technological improvements over the past decades and centuries, and labor markets were effectively able to adjust to those. Some people also mentioned that new technologies not just destroy jobs, but also create new ones. And let me recall, for example, a recent study I have recently seen, which looked at Europe between 1999 and 2010, and that study concluded that routine replacing technologies destroyed 9 million jobs in the EU, so 9 million is quite a big number. But it concluded that at the same time, it created even more, between 14 and 19 billion, depending on the model specification, partly related to the improved technology and lower prices, partly raising employment and demand and spillover effects. So in fact, the impact of new technologies on the number of jobs is not that clear-cut, and in fact, it could be that new technologies create more jobs than what they destroy. Also, it was mentioned a couple of times in the previous sessions that Europe currently faces labor shortages. So in fact, there are a number of professions companies would like to hire more people than who are available, which is certainly also a good sign. But nevertheless, even if the quantitative impact on the number of people employed of technologies might in fact be overall positive, I think it's a very important question whether the impact on equality is also positive or in fact negative. Because one could argue that these new technologies help certain types of workers, in particular with high-skilled workers who are better able to deal with that. Also, for example, Barbara Kaufmann mentioned in the previous session that during the COVID-19 pandemic, mostly high-skilled workers benefited from teleworking, while people in more contact-intensive services, they couldn't really do that, and that might have boosted inequality. So I very much hope that in our panel we will have an insightful discussion on this topic, on what could be the possible impact on equity, and also what policies would be needed. And we have four great speakers, and we are very thankful for them for coming here and sharing their time and thoughts with us. In alphabetic order, Jean-André Barbosa, who is the Vice President of European Affairs and Regulation from the Renault Group. Then we have Eric Canton, the Deputy Chief Economist and Deputy Head of Unit at the European Commission, DG RTD. Then Rafael de Hoyos, who is a Program Leader in Human Development, the EU Member State session of the World Bank. And last but not least, very especially grateful to Chiara Pututaro, who just jumped in because of some last-minute cancellations, who's dealing with EU inequalities and tax policy at Oxfam International. So I thought that we could start this discussion, alphabetically with Jean-André, and also not just for the alphabetic order, but I think it would be very interesting to learn from the experience of a very large manufacturing company on how do you see that how these changing technologies impact equality, at least at Renault, but you might also share your insights for a more general society. Please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's a very important topic for a company like ours. For those of you who might not have the exact figures of Renault, so it's an international company present in 35 countries, car manufacturer, but also providing new mobility solutions. More than 106,000 employees, and I think that's quite relevant for today's discussion. Turnover of around 46 billion euros and more than 2 million vehicles sold last year. Just to set up a little bit the frame in which I am going to speak, because of course I am unable to give you some academic solutions. What I can do is to give you examples of what we are doing and what we are experiencing in Renault Group. As you know, that the mobility sector is ongoing a huge transformation. The twin transitions and the objectives in particular of the European Union in terms of decarbonization are transforming totally our industry. This, of course, is having big effects as well on the way we are structured and on the different skills that we need within the company. So digital transformation is playing a key role. Just to give you an example, Renault is quite in advance on what we call the industrial metaverse. So we have already set up kind of metaverse, which is allowing us actually to follow almost in real time everything what happens in each of our factories. And this has allowed actually to reduce the consumption of energy. By training with the augmented reality, we are able to reduce the waste and the pollution from, for instance, painting of the cars. So to train the people who are painting, now we use augmented reality. We have a lot of examples in the everyday life of a factory where actually digitalization is having a huge effect. Now, of course, the question that is arising, and I understand this is the subject, is how is this affecting actually the before and the after? And I think in the automotive there is something very important, is that we are very linked to the places where we have the factories. So what we call in French the bassin d'emploi. It's really the employment, very important regions depend actually on factories. And this is true not only for automotive, but for all big industries. And the question is, are we able actually to get these places to survive in the long term, to make a sustainable evolution in accordance with the new needs? And I would say that we are making everything possible so that it happens. And I have some examples that I can develop. I think we have only 2 to 3 minutes now, so I will not be too complete. But we have examples of programs, for instance, in Romania, where we are actually upskilling, reskilling the people so that they can be absolutely integrated in the new environments. The same we have done with Flins, and I think Flins is a very important example. Flins is one of the historic plants close to Paris. And this plant was supposed actually to end with the end of the last car that was produced. And it was transformed into a center of circular economy, where actually we are working on closed loops for the automotive industry. And we have created what we call the Renault University, which is a campus in the way of an ecosystem with the public authorities close to this factory that allow us to train, upskill, reskill from what we call in France the bac, so ending the secondary school, the high school, up to 5 years after the bac, but also training, lifelong training for the people of our plants. And our objective, now we have trained up to 2,000 people up to last year, and our objective is to go to 12,000 in 2025. So this, I would start with these examples to say, you are right, the challenge is there. Now it's also a matter of involving the ecosystem as a whole, and the industry is part of this ecosystem so that we can make it work.
Thank you so much, Jean-André. I mean, it's really great to hear that indeed you place so much emphasis on training your employees, but also establishing this university on this closed factory and supporting lifelong learning, which are really essential also for obtaining better skills. Now, let me now turn to Chiara to have some insights from an NGO before turning to the representatives of STEM institutions. So how do you see that recent technological changes and in particular digitalization influencing equalities? For any dimension you want to mention, it can be income, gender, whatever you think would be important.
Thanks. So first of all, thank you very much for having Oxfam here. We think that the involvement of civil society organization in this discussion is part of the solution to tackle inequality. So our work on this sector is preliminary, but what we can already say is that the status quo is, we can say that is anti-worker and pro-inequality. And I don't say that because we are against technology and against innovation, but we think there is a need to consider better what are the implications and discuss them around the table with all the actors involved. And technology innovation can even become an opportunity, actually, to reduce inequality if we really have this discussion. So Oxfam mission is the reduction of inequality. As I told you, we just started approaching this the inequality in this sector, and so we see that there is a risk to exacerbating existent inequality, and we look at both the multidimensional inequality, so inequality, political inequality, social, economical, but also at intersectional inequality, so the different identities, gender and race. So we are approaching this in five main areas, and so here I go also beyond the work, the technology in the workplace. First of all, the access to technology. Here we know that 40% of the population is not connected, and in this percentage, women or racialized group are the biggest part. We have also to consider that there is inequality in access to technology between the cities and the rural areas, or between the north and the south. So these kind of inequalities are impacting when we talk about access. Then we have second an issues of human rights and how technologies are used to reduce civic space. Let's think, for example, at the internet shutdowns. We know there is a campaign on that tracked that in 2022 there were 187 internet shutdowns during protest mainly, and until May we had 81 already of them. And then also connected to human rights, how technology are used to spy activists, journalists, for example, in El Salvador, Dominican Republic, or Mexico. The third area is the privacy violation. The same vulnerable group that are affected also by the access to technology, they are also more vulnerable to the violation of privacy, of human rights, also because they have less knowledge, less tools to defend themselves. Then there is an issue of governance. Here, we talk about the power and the political inequality. So we know that today there are the big technological companies that have a turnover that is higher, is a lot of times higher than the GDP of a countries. And this means that they have a huge political power to influence the decision. So we have to take this into account. At European level, for example, example, among the 10 associations or companies in terms of spending on lobbying, 6 of them are big technological companies. And this kind of political inequality, power inequality, reflects also in an unequal playing field between the big companies and the small and medium enterprises. And then last area, that is also the topic of today, the work, the technology in the workplace and how it affects inequality. Is true. If we look also at the data of the World Economic Forum, they estimate that in 2025, the number of jobs created will outnumber the job destroyed, as you mentioned also the figures in the EU. But we have to think about the quality of the jobs, what kind of jobs. And so here too, we see an impact of the intersectional inequality on different kind of groups. We see, so there is weakening of the trade union. So the panel before discussed it very well. We have really to give more power of the trade unions, to have them on the table. If we think about the remote working, we have to be careful about the rights of the workers, and also we have to reward the care workers. So it's important at the same time to take into consideration. And also connected to the work, before it was mentioned, the supply chain is important to see how workers are treated in all the chain of the technological sector. And then we have also to look at how technology is used to control the workers, sometimes also at the expense of the health, of the safety, of the privacy of workers. So I think that we have to consider all this kind of inequality if we want to develop the technology that can contribute to reducing inequality. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very, very insightful introduction, emphasizing many different aspects of inequality, including political, social, also more global. I mean, for example, the number you said that 40% of global population don't have proper internet access was a bit shocking to me. In Europe, almost the numbers are close to 100. And also the last point on how technologies are used to control workers is, I think, also very interesting, and I'm sure it will generate a lot of questions. But before, let's go to Eric from Eric Canton from the European Commission. So if you could give us a more European perspective. I mean, first in this round, I would like to more focus on the diagnosis, and then the next round on the policy initiatives. So if you could elaborate how you see from the Commission how these emerging technologies impact inequalities, I would very much appreciate it.
Yes, many thanks. And indeed, I think this conference comes at a perfect time. Well, in principle, I think the problem with policy is that it always lags behind technology. So now we all seem to be a bit overwhelmed by how fast AI has made its introduction, although we saw it coming already for quite a while. And now there are indeed many policy debates on the impact, including on income inequality. Perhaps a couple of steps back, and actually many of the things I wanted to say, they have already been said. So I'll try also to still emphasize a couple of new points. But maybe the first point I want to make is AI as part of the digital revolution. It's basically a general purpose technology, yeah? So it's more like a radical innovation that has been say introduced in the 1970s, 1980s of the last century, and that has a widespread impact on the way people live and work. So it's also another important point of these these general purpose technologies is that it sparks new innovations. So there are some initial innovations, and then afterwards you get a second wave of maybe smaller innovations. And but then if you look at artificial intelligence as part of this digital revolution, there are a couple of aspects that make it even a bit more different, and they have actually also been mentioned in the previous panel. But one of the aspects is that it's mostly a revolution in software. So there is often no need for big capital investments. People can have quite easy access to the technology. So the barriers to entry are quite low. So we can expect that this AI wave can generate a whole series of new innovations and new companies. But then there are also quite some uncertainties here about the way AI technology will develop and also the scope it will have. And I think we simply don't know yet the answers to those questions. So of course a lot of the mechanisms we can only just kind of think through and see if we can understand them. I think also Scott Marcus put it rightly by mentioning this empirical question on whether AI is kind of human augmenting or human replacing. So I think that's a crucial question, and probably the answer is it's probably both, depending maybe not so much on the jobs but on the tasks within those jobs. So we should go really to the task level. And what is maybe also different is that with the ICT revolution, there was also the argument that skill bias technical change as one of the reasons of increasing wage dispersion in the economy. So people who were mastering ICT skills, they could basically benefit from these new technologies, and they saw their wages increase, while people without those skills they ran the risk of being replaced. And so there was with the risk of lower wages. And what is of course different now with AI is that it's also certainly affecting the people with advanced skill levels. So it could have a big impact also on the lawyers and the economists and the software engineers. So it might also impact people at with more advanced skill levels. And then indeed what you now also typically see in job vacancies is that there is a bigger demand for, say, transversal skills, like social skills, management skills, organization skills, creativity, and these the fact that these skills are in higher demand could indeed mean that AI and human intelligence are kind of complementary, but again, it will depend on the exact tasks within those jobs. Maybe a last thing I want to mention, and which I didn't hear in the previous panel, is well, first, indeed there is this labor capital divide, and that was indeed mentioned, that the labor shares are kind of under pressure. So there is indeed the risk that the big firms, say the incumbents in AI, that they basically that they own the data, and that this gives them the power, and so there could be a shift from the labor share towards the capital owners, which I think is important. And thirdly, more like a geographical argument, we are in Europe not the strongest in the world when it comes to digital technologies. China and the US are ahead of us. So that also raises questions as regards strategic autonomy and economic security, And it raises the broader question: should we, more invest ourselves in Europe in these technologies? And of course, we are trying to do that. There are all kinds of initiatives, but it will not be easy. It will take time. And on the other hand, sometimes I also have the feeling that even the AI experts are not always 100% sure which way it should go. Some experts say it shouldn't be too difficult to build up that capacity in Europe. It's a matter of bringing in some top people in the world, and then you can perhaps in a couple of years' time you can really expand your capacity. And on the other hand, I can imagine that when it comes to advanced technologies, such as the chips industry, there it might take much longer to build up capacity. Okay, I'll stop here.
Just let me have a very quick follow-up question. You mentioned this possible wage dispersion. I wonder whether in the Commission any unit or the research center did some research for Europe, whether and to what extent it's happening, and if it's similar across EU countries, or there are differences depending on the structure of national markets.
Well, indeed, the topic of income inequality is certainly a very important one. Actually, in my previous role in the Directorate General of Economic and Financial Affairs, we worked quite a lot on the topic of income inequality, also together with colleagues in DG Employment, so with the people in the Directorate of Barbara Kaufmann, using a lot with microdata, trying to see indeed patterns of income dispersion, using different metrics to see how income inequality is developing. There is indeed this general tendency that income inequality tends to increase, but it depends a little bit on the exact metric you use. And then indeed this notion that the labor share is falling. But what is also important, and actually I wanted to bring that also later on when we go more to the policy side, is that this wage dispersion is closely connected to productivity, obviously. And you see certainly also when it comes to ICT and digital that there are large differences. Well, first across countries in, say, ICT investments, but also across firms within a same sector and the same country. So we see big differences in productivity across firms, even within the same sector, and that's a major determinant of wage inequality. So one of the reasons to kind of to reduce income inequalities is, in my view, also to try and reduce these differences in productivity, and then so that relates to stories like adoption and diffusion of technologies, but perhaps also competition, which may sound a bit odd because competition has not always a good name, let's put it that way. But competition is also a way to discipline firms and to kind of force technology adoption by firms, and that could kind of reduce the productivity differences, and that could help and reduce income differences.
Yeah, many thanks. I mean, this sort of productivity differences across firms is very pertinent. Now let's turn to Raphael, last but not least. From the World Bank, I mean, I also know that you're always preparing many big studies, but there's also a specific study in progress which looks at the impact of AI and digital technologies on equality. I don't know whether that's ready or not or in progress, but if you could broaden the discussion to a more, taking a more global perspective on how you see these digital technologies influencing equality in different parts of the world, I would very much appreciate.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, for the opportunity to share the messages that are emerging from this report that is actually ready, and we will launch it after the summer. And I will try to summarize. This is a report that is EU-wide, EU-related, and it looks precisely at the question that brings us today. What is the impact of the future of work on income inequality, on economic growth and productivity. We try to merge these two literatures that usually don't talk to each other. And I'll try to summarize this report in 3 broad messages. The first message is there a trade-off between more productivity at the expense of more income dispersion? And the answer, the short answer is yes, there is. So let me just walk you through, and some of the things, some of the linking mechanisms between technology and inequality have already been pointed out by Eric. But the first one is that when we look at firm level data and we look at which firms are actually adopting new technologies, and here I'm not talking only about AI, but AI, robotics, information technology, which firms are adopting this technology? Relatively productive and relatively large firms. What's the impact of that on the firm's productivity and the size of these firms in terms of total sales? The impact is positive. So you have this process that more productive, larger firms adopt more technology and become even larger. So the impact of technology adoption on market concentration is positive, is increasing market concentration, is giving rise to what David Author and others call the superstar firms, which at the same time reduces the share of national income that is going to labor. So this is the first, if you wish, more Ricardian for the economists in the room, more the Ricardian approach to inequality is increasing the share of income that goes to capital, reducing the share of income that goes to labor. But within labor, you have skilled and unskilled labor, in particular workers that have a university degrees and other workers. And what we've seen, and this is actually answering your question, it's increasing inequalities between workers of different levels of education. Why? Because what happens within the firms is that when a firm adopts a new technology, they change the production function. What this means is that they change the way they combine the different inputs and into different tasks. And what we have seen is that the firms that are adopting technology are changing tasks, and these tasks are social tasks, high-order cognitive tasks, are being done in a more productive way by university graduates. Not even vet graduates are able to perform this task in a very effective way. So that's the first big message. The second message is there is an ample margin for European firms to increase their adoption share. So when you compare the adoption rates among European firms with the US firms, the US firms have a larger share of technology adoption in most of these categories. But when you dig further, you see that the big difference is among small and micro firms. In the other side of the North Atlantic, they are adopting more technologies, these small firms. In the EU, not so much. So there's, and I don't want to jump into policy conclusions because you told us not to do so, but that's the second bucket. Is how can we increase technology adoption, especially among small and micro firms in the EU, so that we break these positive relationship between technology adoption and market concentration, and we further the adoption of new technologies and productivity. The third and final message, at least in this first round, is that there is something going on in labor markets that doesn't have a resemblance in perhaps the most important institution in charge of supplying skills. And I'm referring to the education systems in Europe. So when you look at labor markets are creating, labor markets that are driven by technology are creating new occupations that didn't exist 10 years ago. They are also doing something else. They are reducing job tenure. So if our grandparents had 3 jobs throughout their lifetimes, our kids will have 10 jobs throughout their lifetimes. So this really is kind of at odds with this notion that you can go to school, get certain professional competencies via vocational education and training, go work for Renault, and then spend 30 years in Renault. Maybe he was lucky enough, but I don't think this is the characteristics of the future of work. The future of work is about uncertainties. The future of work is about reinventing yourself. So when you look at it in this way, then we need to provide our kids, particularly those in the lower part of the income distribution, with the tools, skills to reinvent themselves. And these are foundational skills. Social skills, basic numeracy, basic literacy, problem solving, teamwork, resilience. These are the things that all of them should have, regardless of what's their life project. And I'll stop there.
No, I mean, it's really fascinating, and I think I very much look forward to looking at the publication after the summer, and I guess it will receive a great attention. And also thanks so much for highlighting 3 key points. Now, since we have an industry representative here, I can't resist coming to you and asking your comments, especially on the first 2 points, namely that I mean, you are from a big company like the superstar firm, if I can use that expression, a very big company which is probably adopt a lot of new technologies and at the frontier and of innovation and the technological development. But how? So do you also see? I mean, for example, I guess you have lots of suppliers who are perhaps small and small firms. Do you also see in your supplier chain that these suppliers are also somewhat lagging behind? I mean, I think your operations are mostly in Europe, certainly not in North America. And indeed, and what is the margin to adopt further technologies, both in big firms and in smaller firms?
Well, thank you. No problem to call me superstar. That's very fine. And second, I actually fully agree. With the teaser is fantastic. I would read the report. The only difference is that you can come to Renault and say 30 years, you can have the 10 jobs. But it's true that you will not be doing the same one. But still, I think it's very important to understand that the big groups today are also fighting for talent, and that you need actually to train during the whole lifetime. And I think that's important to understand, that the groups understand that very, very precisely. Now, I absolutely agree, and this is there is one word I said in my first intervention, which maybe was not emphasized enough, is the idea of ecosystem. I think more and more now we understand as well, the big companies, that we are part of an ecosystem, and if we want to move further, you also need the ecosystem to come along. And I think there is a responsibility for those companies which are in an ecosystem, kind of the engines, the ones moving a little bit the whole thing, to take also part of the job to make sure that everyone goes forward. So if you tell me what would be my recommendations in terms of the ecosystem, so what are we doing actually? First of all, I think we really need, and it was mentioned, to be careful about the nature of the knowledge that we're giving to the children and throughout the trainings, because it's changing, and we need to make sure that we're giving to, at any stage in life, we're giving the proper knowledge. We also need, and especially true in the EU, maybe to get a little bit more of homogenization, actually, of the programs, because also you are each time moving more. Lifelong training seems to me to be a constant today. So as was mentioned, you will not have one job, and you will not be an expert on one thing for your life. Now you need to make sure, and it has to be done between partners. That means industrial, academic, public authorities, and this is what I call the ecosystem as well. This is what we're doing in FLA with the authorities, with the universities. It's also what the Commission is actually helping us to do in Romania, where actually we are training 1,000 employees. It's a project budget of 1 million euros, and it's a diversity of functions such as research and development, production, engineering, maintenance, global business services. I think it's important here as well to make sure we not forget anyone. So 25% women, 5% seniors. it's important to get everyone on board. So it's also something we have quite understood in this regard. And just to mention again that because there is quite a focus, I have understood that there is a big fear that digitalization will create a lot of inequalities. It's also true that we are fighting also for talent, and we should not forget this. So we are creating, as I mentioned, the Renault University. There is also an organization called the Software Republic. I don't know if you have heard about it. It's 6 big French companies, including Renault, but also Orange, Dassault, Thales, Atos, that have come together to say, let's work together, each one on our main core business, and let's try to develop again, an ecosystem which is favorable to progress and to catch up with this. And the Talent Academy was created in 2022. And the idea is again to be at the same time an incubator of ideas from people, an accelerator of careers for people in the job, but also a factory of talent, so giving a lot of different skills, especially in subjects that we don't have a lot of expertise, such as cybersecurity, for instance. So I think don't imagine that the private sector and the industry is not engaged into this, because it's our future as well. I think it's very important to understand we are committed. Each company, I'm sure, has its own initiatives. We are all trying to do the best out of this transformation. Philosophical question, can you really stop the progress? So the question afterwards, depending on the answer, but probably what you need is to really adapt in a responsible way, making sure that everyone remains on the boat and no one is left outside. And this is what we're trying to do in Renault Group.
I mean, that's really fascinating, and it's very good to hear that indeed companies take the responsibility that they also need to play their role in, especially in the training of the workforce. Now, our time is running, so we have less than half an hour. I would like to have one more round, but also I'd like to have open the floor for questions and comments. So in the next round, I would like to be very brief and just to the point on basically what policies would you advocate? If you could just limit maybe to 2 things, so each of you. So what would you like, for example, you from the French government to do, or the European Commission to do? I mean, Chiara, you can address your recommendations to anyone. I mean, certainly the Commission is more about European policies, and the World Bank is, it maybe is most difficult for the World Bank because you cover so many different countries. But if you could, let's say, highlight the 2 most prominent policy initiatives that must be done to smooth or help the possibly adverse impacts of digital transition on labor markets, what would you suggest? Maybe let me start with Eric, who is actually doing policy.
But it's also a challenge, because I had actually 3 broad areas.
Okay, you can have 3.
If you
are brief, you can have 3.
I will be very, very brief, because I wanted to kind of structure the policies related to income inequality in 3 broad domains, which based on the work in ECFIN I mentioned earlier, is organized along pre-market, in-market, and post-market drivers of inequality. So the pre-market drivers, they typically refer to education systems. So while it was already mentioned, education and skills and lifelong learning are essential. Perhaps it's even a bit more complicated, because it's not only about upgrading skills, but if people really have to cope with drastic changes in their professional activities, that may be actually even more costly than the training itself. So there's also maybe some kind of mental flexibility required from people to make these adjustments in activities. The second one on in-market drivers, so that refers to the fusion story I mentioned earlier, but also, for example, the big question: who owns the data? So certainly also with artificial intelligence. So basically, we in Europe are kind of training with European data the algorithms that are owned by companies in the US, and you can ask yourself the question: is say the competition framework, is it still up to date? Should we not try to kind of disentangle, say, the ownership of the data from the other entrepreneurial activities? And the post-market drivers, that indeed refers to looking again at our tax systems and our social security systems. So we probably have to modernize our social security systems, which may not be obvious. Certainly also because the tax base may be eroded. You know, if labor gets a smaller share of the income, then it might be more difficult to collect taxes from labor income. So it kind of brings back to the fore the discussion on increasing capital taxes. And indeed, the social security systems to make them kind of fit for to kind of cope with all these transitions and possibly the changing labor capital relationships. Okay, I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Very clear point. And I think your reference to taxes naturally leads to Chiara as one of your main areas of research is taxes. So again, 2 or perhaps 3, if you are brief, what would be your main recommendations?
And I will mention taxes. So the first, I would say, the governance and the importance to invite at the table not just the big companies, authorities, but also civil society and also small and medium enterprises. So everybody has really to be part of the discussion. And here it's also important to reduce the excessive power that these big stars company have, and this goes also through taxation. There are reforms ongoing, but we really need that these companies, not only the digital sector, pay their fair share, and this can also contribute to reducing the windfall profit that they make. And then second point, to really take into account all the effects that this technology have on all the different aspects of society. So conducting spillover effects. And one important point I want to make is that sometimes we have examples that are coming not from the US and the EU, but also from low middle income countries. For example, there is this initiative in Brazil, Not My AI Brazil, that is mapping harmful AI projects. So projects that increase racial or gender inequality. And so we should look also at other geographical area. And then just to conclude with a philosophical remark, we should include this discussion in a discussion on the beyond growth approach. There was a big event in the European Parliament about that. We don't just have to look at the GDP growth, creation of new jobs, but our objective should be really the well-being of people and the reduction of inequality.
Thank you very much. I think your philosophical core for focusing on well-being is indeed very well made. Now, Jean-André, you described what Renault and other big companies are doing, but if you could advise the French government, what would you suggest them to do or change?
I think I would say 2 things. First, I totally agree that the ESG today is a must. This criteria must be really taken seriously into account, and I think this is in the process, and it is being, is being now implemented. So ESG criteria will become important, are important, must become important. You can use the word you want, but we really believe in that. So that would be the first one. The second one is what we need in terms of industry to make sure that we can also develop properly, because today we are in a world with also a big geopolitical competition. So it's not because you say this is a big company that the big company is not subject to huge competition worldwide, and especially we see today from the China and the US. If I started talking to you about the electric vehicle, I'm sure you you would understand very easily the pressure which is on the sector. So what we really need is a real strategy, industrial strategy from the EU. So this is more than France. Is really what we need is a real strategy, not a piling of regulation as we are seeing today, but really an industrial strategy which allows to see the direction towards a sustainable, let's say, development of the company, and therefore to also be able to accompany all the transitions and the inequalities that could arise in the way to this. And I'm saying this because Renault in particular took the decision to actually relocate the electric vehicle business mainly into France, into electricity, which is 2 hours away from here. This is a choice that we wanted really to be in Europe. And I think a courageous choice, knowing the situation globally, but at the same time, we're very proud of it. What we need now is to have the conditions to make sure that we can develop, and everyone in the company together, everyone in the ecosystem together.
Thank you so much. I think your call for an EU-wide industrial strategy, I think, is heard in many corners, and in fact also some of my colleagues at Bruegel, they are working on how to advise that. And again, last but not least, Rafael, I know it's very difficult to highlight 2 key points, but what are the 2 key policy recommendations you would make?
So let me try to summarize the 2 key messages of the report that tries to address the inequality between capital and labor, and within labor, skilled and unskilled workers. So the first one is promotion of technology adoption. We know by analyzing firm-level data, what we understand is that there are 3 important determinants of technology adoption. The availability or the access to finance is one. The second one is managerial capacity of CEOs of firms. Those with higher managerial capacities adopt more technology. Also the business regulation, but there's a 4th one that is by far the most important and is connected to the difference between skilled and unskilled workers. And actually this 4th one because it helps promote technology adoption and therefore increases productivity, but it also helps reducing income inequality, can actually eliminate the trade-off between productivity and inequality, and is human capital. So when you have availability of human capital, skills among the population, particularly foundational skills, then you have more technology adoption, and if these foundational skills are present among disadvantaged kids, then you also eliminate or reduce at least the difference in wage between highly educated and other workers. Now that's the first set. The second one goes at the core of the education system. And here you have to think about the following characteristic of European education system. Half of the kids that are going to secondary education in EU 27 countries, half of them go to a vocational education and training system. They don't go there because necessarily they chose to go there, but because there's a placement examination. The best students, according to this test scores, go to the general track, and the not so well students go to the vocational track. What you end up having is that the most disadvantaged European kids, they end up in the vocational track. And if you believe the little story that I told you about the importance of foundational skills, and they will become more important in the future, we know that 25% of the secondary school kids, 15-year-old kids in the EU, do not achieve minimum learning standards, numeracy, literacy, measured by the PISA test, 25. But if you separate this into those that are going to the vocational and the general track, then those going in the general track is only less than 15%, close to 12%, versus 40% not achieving minimum learning standards. So these are our most disadvantaged kids that are going to this track that is providing them with some professional competencies that I can assure you that in 5-10 years, the labor market will make those competencies obsolete, and they are not getting the core, transversal, universal skills, foundational skills that they need to navigate an ever-changing labor market.
Well, very shocking. I mean, this number that you said that a quarter of kids do not meet minimum standards, and let's hope indeed that educational reforms will help to address these problems. But now we still have 15 minutes, so let me open up the floor for questions, both from who are actually present here and also those who are online. If you go to Slido and #future of work, you can type. And if my colleagues help me, because this tablet went to sleep, then I will be able to check the online questions. But till then, let's have some questions from the floor. And for the sake of time, I suggest we collect a couple of questions and then I ask the panelists to respond in one go, because this 15 minutes is a rather short time. So okay. Anna, can you please help with this?
Okay, so it is great that Renault is investing so much in training and reskilling of its employees, but there I can see the intrinsic motivation, because you are facing a huge labor and skill shortages, so it's sort of a survival necessity that you need to train internally. Maybe the same, we could find a similar internal motivation for how we develop technologies, because right now my understanding is that the main motivation how we use technology in production is also in other sectors is to improve productivity and to reduce costs. And as long as the reducing cost is a motivation, then in the end the tech adoption will be also has a labor reducing aspect to it. And I wonder whether there is something we can do on the tech policy side to a bit influence how we design technology from a more labor substitute to more a labor augmenting aspect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just let's collect some questions and then please on the.
Okay, thanks. Gerard Oosterwijk, I'm from FEPS. I'm a digital policy analyst at FEPS. I'm very interested to learn more about the study that will come after the summer. I did hear some things that we found ourselves, and also what I saw, like Google did a big survey of SMEs. So what had already digitalized SMEs, they were more positive about the future. So this is actually the front runners are moving ahead with the digital transition. The front runners are getting more ahead, and the laggers behind are getting more behind. We did a study for FEPS. It was more in the public sector, so the recovery funds, when it came to education and health, where we also found that the reforms, actually the more digitalized member states or more digitalized sectors, they were using the digitalization, because 20% of this recovery funds, the COVID funds, had to go into digitalizations. So the more digitalized, we're using it more, and we're more using it for reforms than the laggers behind. The laggers behind, we're using it less. So we see this whole pattern, this whole trend. And since we are talking also about the twin transition, and at the beginning of this day also it was it's a political assessment, but it is one of the political priorities of the EU, to not lose out to the US or to China. How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to make sure that this dynamic that seems almost natural, what does the EU or what do member states or what should we all do to change this dynamic? Because I think it's quite fundamental, because otherwise we're going to lose out not only certain citizens or certain inequalities, but also the backbone of our economy in Europe, the SME sector. So maybe it's interesting to shed a bit light on that. Like, we will read the study, but there's more studies pointing in this direction, so it seems kind of fundamental.
Thank you. Very good point. I think there's a question here.
My name is Christina Hagen. I'm Labour and Social Counsellor at the Norwegian mission to the EU. And I'd like to dig into this question of the relationship between productivity and wage dispersion again, because you mentioned how productivity differs across sectors and across companies. But isn't it also a question of whether the job and the task itself, how productive can it get through the use of new technology? To take maybe a blunt example, if I'm a bartender, there are limits on how much I can increase my productivity because it's not so very scalable, the job that I'm doing, selling beers. So maybe in that kind of job, technology has a limited impact on creating more revenue, whereas if I'm creating an app, it's very scalable and I can be super productive. So what I'm trying to ask is, are we bound to see a bigger difference in wage generation between those kind of jobs, types of jobs? And if the goal is to limit inequalities, how can we develop policies to create, to prevent growing inequalities when different kind of jobs are, not every job can become more productive through technology? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very well made question. Is there any other question? Yeah, the gentleman here.
Mine?
Yeah.
Is it done? Okay. Wouter Zwijsse from the European Trade Union Institute. And my question surprisingly concerns trade unions and collective bargaining. But mainly it's on, thank you very much for a really interesting panel. It was great. My question is on the link between technological change and wage inequality within between firms. So we know that a lot of wage inequality is rising between firms over time, and that this does indeed seem to be driven by greater technological innovation, greater take of new technologies, and likely this will only spiral further with the new innovations that are happening. But from what we also see from research, that doesn't seem to be the case everywhere, and things like worker representation, but especially collective bargaining and collective agreements can put these wage inequalities into some sort of control. And we do see that strongly when we look at cross-national research and research over time, that there's big differences between the countries, especially in Europe, where there are stronger collective agreements, where we still have these productivity gains, but not the same inequality gains. So my question was just to the panel, what are your thoughts on the role of collective agreements, collective bargaining in this whole process? Thanks.
Thank you. And another question here. Just here.
Thank you. And I actually had this question to a previous panel, but I think it fits nicely picking on what you just said. I'm curious, in now, but also in the previous panel, we discussed about all of these inequalities where workers, for example, can be exploited because of the platforms. But I'm curious if there is any research that suggests that distribution of this inequality is the same across different jobs. For example, when we talk about platform workers and them being exploited, we typically think of Deliveroo drivers, Uber, taxi drivers, jobs like this. But I know that there are, for example, lawyers that are working in a platform kind of gig work arrangements. And these are definitely kind of low-skilled versus high-skilled jobs. So do you know if, let me phrase it this way, do you think that inequalities, discrimination and exploitation that we are seeing as negative effects of technology, do they apply equally to different types of the jobs? Or actually the worst effects are in the low-skilled jobs, and therefore, building on what Raphael was saying, we are seeing even an increase in inequality due to technology?
Yeah, another very good question. And finally, there is one question which is also you can read on the screen by Per Lundström. What about white collar changing careers to blue collar? There is a visible trend, but is there any research? So now let me ask the panelists to pick the question they want. But before, let me abuse my position as a chair and give just a two-sentence answer on the question on collective bargaining, because in fact, with two of my colleagues, Julian and Camille, who are sitting here, we did a research And in fact, we found both across countries and both in time that in countries with a higher level of collective bargaining, inequality tends to be lower. But now let me stop that and in fact ask the panelists maybe in this order as you sit from the right to me. So pick any question you would like to, but keep in mind that we have only 5 minutes for the 4 of you.
So I will be very quick and take the first question, which will be in the order. Just to be clear, it's a matter of survival. When you say that we're doing this because it's a matter of survival, I think any company considers, or I think a company should consider human capital as the main asset. So you don't want to get rid of your main asset. No one wants. So if the thing is evolving, and believe me, the transition that the automotive sector is going through is existential in the sense that we are stopping a technology for we were world leaders and we're entering in a world of uncertainty where you have a lot of different competition. So you are right in a sense that we need to adapt. There are different ways of adapting. We try to do it very responsibly, reallocating in Europe, in our home place in France in particular, but also Romania, Spain, but also trying also to get our people in places where this business is going to stop and something else is coming. Well, let's be all together and make it work so that the new people, the new jobs are fit for the people are fit for the new jobs. So I would say it's not really kind of only the interest. Our interest is of course to keep the main asset, which is our people. But I would not put it like kind of this is just productivity against labor, reducing costs. Reducing costs with technology, the training on the painting of the cars. You cannot imagine before how much waste of painting, therefore emissions, therefore energy, therefore hours were lost in this. Now we have reduced it, I think it's by 10,000, the waste, because we are doing training with technology, which is the augmented reality. This is just an example. Energy the same. Now we can measure second by second consumption in each of the places of the factories. Reduction of the cost. Yes, of course. But it doesn't mean that we see it in a way which is very kind of reduction technology equals we reduce the labor. This is not the way we see it. And the best parallel is Korea. Korea is probably similar to France. And there you have seen that the work has changed in nature, not necessarily in terms of quantity. This is what we...
Thank you very much. Very clear answer. Now, Raphael, you have a difficult task to summarize in 1 minute all your answers.
Yeah, let me try to summarize in 1 minute. First, 2 of the questions were related to research that is being done on the other side of the North Atlantic. The MIT put together this task force that is called the Task Force for the Future of Work, and they have both come up with what somebody online posed this question of changing from white to blue collar workers. That is something that is called hollow in the middle, so that the separation or the reduction in the number of jobs in the middle part of the skills distribution, and some of them have been replaced by jobs in the lowest part of the skills distribution. There's also the same report has been shown that collective bargaining in Europe has somehow, as you put it very well, it has put under control this wage inequality as opposed to the US, which is out of control. So let me just try to answer your question, which I think is a very good question. It's like, well, the bartender, how much can we replace the bartender with technology? The answer is right now, not very much. And actually there's something called, in terms of task, is called the non-cognitive, non-repetitive task. And those are like, you can't really, it doesn't imply a very high order cognitive skills, but because it's not repetitive, we cannot put it in an algorithm, so it's not very keen or very easy to replace, but it doesn't mean that it won't be replaced in the future. And let me just close with a final thought. We talk about the future of work, and you actually mentioned the word crystal ball. Oh, well, let's bring the crystal ball. If we had a crystal ball, we couldn't see the future, not even if the crystal ball worked, because the future doesn't exist yet. The future is something that you and I and all of us, through our decisions, are shaping in everyday life. So we can actually choose to have a future of work where technology is complementing low-skilled workers. We had to put the policies in place to do that. It will take time, but in the end, it's our decision. Thanks.
So much.
Yep. Eric, please.
Yes, maybe first on the point of wage inequality in labor market institutions. Well, I think it's clear that we are searching for a new economic model, and we have basically our wish list of properties: inclusive, sustainable, digital. But indeed, we are still searching on how to exactly achieve that. I think on the positive front, I think the Scandinavian models, they have proven to be quite successful in combining, say, economic efficiency arguments and equity arguments. But I think what is important here is that there is also kind of trust in society that, that it's not necessarily about protecting jobs, but about protecting workers. And, it's a simple statement, but it requires probably quite a change in mindset. But the Scandinavian models have proven that it is possible. So in that sense, I'm quite optimistic that modernizing social security systems can lead to optimal combinations of economic progress, but also progress on other fronts. And that also brings me to the second point on good jobs. What are good jobs? I think we should indeed think about what we mean by that. Actually, Acemoglu and Restrepo, they already said not everything that can be automated must be automated. So I think this is a good thing to keep in mind. So we should think of what we mean by good jobs, what we mean by good sectors. And indeed, that also brings me, just to finish, by a nice quote I cannot resist mentioning, from Jeffrey Sachs. So what humans can do in the AI era is just to be human beings, because this is what robots or AI can't do. And I think this is a nice quote. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Chiara, please.
So on the issues of how inequality is distributed according to the different jobs, we didn't conduct comprehensive analysis. We could see on the ground that the low-skilled jobs are more affected, and this was in particular visible during the COVID in the remote working, where low-income workers could not access actually the advantage of the remote working. On the issues of the gap on the use in the use of technology between big firms and small and medium enterprises, I think there the issue is to have the reduction of this gap, this inequality gap, as an objective, and so to put in place some instruments to also make easier for other kind of companies to access technology, but already recognizing the problem can then bring to find solution for that. Of course, the role of the collective bargaining trade unions, we consider it very important. Here there is also an issue on how much more precarious jobs, informal jobs are represented today by the trade unions, and how they have to keep the pace with the new kind of jobs. And on the issues of productivity and how technology affects in a different way productivity in different jobs, yeah, I would say, so we shouldn't consider just the productivity of the jobs. We are here really to reconsider what is the value of the different jobs for the society. For instance, care workers or teachers, probably with the indicators we have today, they don't contribute so much to productivity, but we have really to reconsider how we value this kind of jobs. So we should increase actually the value of the jobs and not consider just the economic productivity. And with that,
thank you so much. And I think it's a very nice closing word to switch to the last session. So there is no break now, but in fact there will be a closing discussion between Anna Diamantopoulou and Laszlo Andor, chaired by my colleague Scott Marcus. But before that, please join me in thanking all the panelists for the very insightful discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you.